week next Tuesday. So Dr. Riddhi Jyoti will speak for 15 minutes on supportive care related to mucositis and dermatitis. And after that, our rehabilitation expert, Ms. Soumya Shri, she will be presenting on oncology rehabilitation improving outcomes. Primarily, she'll be concentrating on head and neck cancer and breast cancer. So I, Dr. Tanveer, welcome you all. And with this, I pass on to Dr. Riddhi to take over. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Uh, Thank you, sir. So, my topic is supportive care during head and neck radiotherapy, and I'll be, like sir said, I'll be dealing it in two parts: the part one and part two. In this part one, I'll mainly deal with mucositis and dermatitis, and the rest of it that includes nutrition and everything will be dealt in the next week seminar. We all know that head and neck cancer is yeah, so we all know that head and neck cancer is one of the most common cancers that we come across in our clinics, and head and neck cancer radiation related toxicities is something that we look into every day in our clinics. This seminar is essentially based on something that we all follow, and it's nothing new. Uh, Directly delving into the topic for today. So the factor influencing the morbidity of head and neck cancers, morbidity of head and neck cancer related toxicity include age, performance status, comorbidities, extent of disease, previous treatment received, pre-treatment nutritional status, psychosocial factors, education, and uh, other awareness related factors. So my flow of the seminar would be, I would be talking about mucositis management and pathophysiology of mucositis and dermatitis. In the next seminar, would be discussing about nutrition in details and other radiation-related toxicities. So coming to oral mucositis first. Mucositis is essentially the inflammation of the oral mucosa resulting from radiation or chemotherapy, and the incidence of mucositis in head and neck cancer overall is around 30 to 60%. However, if you look into just the grade uh, 3 or 4, it is 25 to 45%. The incidence of the same would be very high in if chemotherapy is given concurrently with radiation, and then again if we look into the grade 3 and 4 incidence, it is almost around 30 to 50%. What is exactly the pathophysiology of mucositis? Again, it can be divided into phases. The first phase is the vascular phase, which is essentially it occurs with the release of free radicals and resulting in increased vascular permeability. And then that leads to the phase 2, which is the epithelial phase, and there is impaired cell division, reduction of epithelial turnover, and erythema. Then it comes to the phase 3, which is essentially the ulcerative phase, where an ulcer develops because of lack of cellular turnover in the mucosal epithelium, and on top of that, there is a microbial colonization over the mucosal surface, leading to uh, other symptoms like pain and the last phase is the phase 4, which is essentially the healing phase, where there is a recovery of the mucosal breach. Now coming to the grading, we all know will not be discussing in details, but essentially grade one is when there is injection or if there is a very mild pain that does not require analgesics. Grade two when there is patchy mucositis producing an inflammatory serosanguinous discharge. Grade three when that's the same becomes confluent, and grade four is when there is ulceration and hemorrhage or necrosis. What are the risk factors again for the same? The risk factors would be uh, younger age or very old. So that's the patient related risk factors include young age and very old. So this is something to note that younger people are at higher risk of developing mucositis as compared to old. And again, very old age would be again at a very higher risk. So poor nutritional status is again one of the important factors. Other factor would include hygiene and your blood counts and other habits like smoking, alcohol, and consumption along with during the course of the treatment. So the radiation related factors and chemotherapy related factors are also there. Radiation related factors is obviously the cumulative dose, the volume of the treatment, overall treatment time, the technique that we're using, and if we and the fact if we're using any radioprotectants along with radiotherapy or not. Chemotherapy related factors, it would again depend on the number of cycles. If the chemotherapy is given in bolus, uh, in bolus or not, and then other factors are also there. Timing of mucositis, for conventional radiotherapy, the mucositis begins at 1 to 2 weeks, and ulcerative mucositis develops after 30 gray. For accelerated radiation peak, for accelerated radiation peak again, 1 second. Yep. Sorry. So again, for accelerated radiation, the peak develops within 3 weeks. So it takes a little longer for accelerated radiation whenever it is done along with hyper. Just a second. I'm so sorry. Yeah, so for accelerated radiation, it again takes a little longer if it is done with hyperfractionation. Interstitial implants the mucositis begins 7 to 10 days, 10 days after the implant is done and peaks after 2 weeks. Again, the mucositis is always limited to the field of the radiation and resolves within 3 to 6 weeks after completion of the radiotherapy. Again, the thing the thing to note here is that mucositis is not just related to the mucosal integrity, but is also the fact that we dwell on mucositis so important and give it so much importance because it is also related to with pain, dysphagia, and then other toxicities come in as a result of mucositis, namely the dysphagia or dynophagia, and the nutritional intake decreases and also has its own systemic manifestation. So mucositis is not just related to the mucosal breach, but there are other factors that are related along with mucositis. So how do we assess mucositis? Again, like there is the simplest one that we follow is the RTOG toxicity criteria. Along with that, there are some other patient-related outcome measures that are also there to assess the mucositis and the symptoms associated with mucositis. There is this questionnaire. So there is this patient self-administered tool by Epstein et al., also known as the Oral Mucositis Weekly Questionnaire. That is also, we can use some questionnaires of this sort to assess the mucositis. Other options are also there for assessing mucositis. The Clinical application of mucositis would again include frequent treatment breaks, pain, malnutrition, infection, hospitalization, and again it has impact on quality of life. That includes speaking, swallowing, and maintaining oral hygiene. How do we manage mucositis? Essentially, patient education and awareness is of paramount importance. We need to talk to the patient after the radiation starts and tell them what to expect out of as a side effect of radiotherapy, how important oral hygiene is during the course of the radiation, and how important nutritional counseling is during the course of the radiation. The simple thing that we follow is a salt and soda gargle. So we ask the patient uh, to to make a solution of 1 liter of water along with 1 teaspoon of salt and half teaspoon of soda, and mix it and then use it to gargle every 10 to 15 minutes all throughout the day. And along with that, to avoid spicy and raw food, to take plenty of fluids and prescribe oral anesthetics whenever necessary. So what to do and what not to do, for that there is this is review article, the MASCCISOO clinical practice guideline for management of mucositis secondary to cancer therapy. This has answered a lot of questions regarding the same. There are various recommendations and suggestions. So recommendation is something that has high level of a high level of evidence behind it, and suggestions do not have that high level of evidence, but still can be done to ease the symptoms of the patients. And then they have been further divided into that are in favor of intervention, and those that are against intervention. So these are the recommendations in favor of interventions, and they have given 5 options that can be done as a 5 recommendations that can be done to take care of the oral mucositis. The first one includes the oral cryotherapy. The second one is the panel also recommends the recombinant human keratinocyte growth factor, the KGF1, also known as paliformin. The third recommendation is using low-level laser therapy that can be used for mucositis. Fourth one is patient control analgesia, which is again for not for head and neck cancer per se. And the fifth one would be benzidamine mouthwash. So oral cryotherapy is nothing but asking the patient to use ice chips or cold water to prevent mucositis. We all know that decreasing the temperature decreases the inflammation, and that can prevent mucositis. Paliformin, which is again a recombinant human keratinocyte, a growth factor, and that it stimulates the growth of epithelial cells. And it is FDA approved for the same since December 2004. The dose that can be used is 60 microgram per kg per day, IV bolus for 3 days prior to and for 3 days beginning the stem cell reinfusion. This is usually not used during head and neck. We do not use during head and neck radiation, but again, this paper does recommend the use of human keratinocyte growth factor. Low-level laser therapy, that is something which is non-invasive, simple, and atraumatic. Again, is recommended intervention. Helium and neon lasers can be used, or also diode lasers can be used. And the recommendation is that at least the prophylactic 2 joule per centimeter square of the same, and for this to be used, and at least 1 centimeter square is to be treated. Treatment time again should include 20 to 40 seconds, and that this entire recommendation has been given in the same paper that I'm talking about. Main effects it has the analgesic effect, anti-inflammatory effect, and wound healing effect. Secondly, the benzidamine or mouthwash. can also be prescribed to the patient. So benzidamine is essentially a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. Other oral care protocols to brush to would include brushing and flossing once daily, at least once daily, rinsing the mouth, like I have already said, and to avoid any other kind of irritant like alcohol and tobacco. Moisturizers for lips can be used, and to maintain adequate hydration. There are other suggestions that suggestions that are in favor of interventions, and that also includes the transdermal fentanyl and 2% morphine mouthwash. I will not be going in details about the same. Something that some recommendations against interventions would be usage of sucralfate mouthwash that are not to be used, and other antimicrobial lozenges like bacitracin, clotrimazole, gentamicin, and other lozenges and paste. There is the paper again recommends against the use of the same to prevent oral mucositis. And some suggestions against intervention would be again our chlorhexidine mouthwash and the granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor mouthwash for preventing oral mucositis. Now coming to dermatitis, the pathophysiology of dermatitis is again it happens in the phases. So there is a phase of erythema, which is essentially because of capillary dilatation and resultant increase in vascularity in the dermis. That leads to pigmentation, and pigmentation again is because of increased production of melanin by the melanocytes, and also migration of the melanin to the more superficial layers of the epidermis. Moist desquamation occurs due to moist desquamation occurs, and there's a resultant exposure of subdermal lymphatics due to the loss of the surface epithelium, and epilation occurs that is essentially the damage of the epithelial hair follicles, and then telangiectasia is because of loss of microvascular endothelium, causing capillary loops to contract and fuse into a dilated channel that beneath the atrophied epidermis that looks like that, and that looks like a telangiectasia. I will not go in details about the toxicity grading, but essentially the grade 1 is dry and follicular and faint or dull erythema, and grade, as we move towards grade 4, there is focal to confluent moist desquamation and leading to ulceration, which comes in grade 4. So in this one picture, you can see all 4 grades of dermatitis, starting from the erythema to dry desquamation to moist desquamation and skin necrosis. Now coming to the counseling and treatment. So education and avoidance of tight clothes is something that we always advise. We advise the patient to wear cotton clothes that has less friction, and to avoid shorts with collars. Oral intake of fluid should be limited, should be at least 3 to 4 liters per day. Shaving is not allowed after the initiation of radiation. Mild soap can be used, but no scrubbing, and shavers to be avoided, but trimmers can be given, and protection from direct sun exposure. So again, this review article gives a much more insight into the management of dermatitis. So to prevent acute skin reaction, skin washing should not be restricted, and patients should be allowed to use gentle washing practices and shampoo and soap, etc. And there is insufficient evidence to support or refute the use of topical corticosteroids or sucralfate cream, for that matter, for the management of acute skin reactions. So the general recommendation is that you can use low dose corticosteroid, but overuse should be avoided because it has its own set of side effects. Steroid ointment doesn't decrease dermatitis, in per se, but it has its anti-inflammatory action, and it does decrease the symptoms that are related to dermatitis. Other recommendations are usage of aloe vera and gential violet antiseptic for grade 3 skin reactions, and barrier dressing are also something that can be advised to the patient. Properties of barrier dressing would be is that it prevents trauma and traps moisture, and also gives a uh, uh, also is impermeable to bacteria and prevents exposure of the grade 3 area. The type can be adherent and non-adherent. Essentially includes hydrochloride dressing which is essentially an occlusive dressing. It gives a moist healing environment, and it gives insulation, and it is impermeable to bacteria. It is again these occlusive barrier dressing are contraindicated in infection. Amniotic membrane can also be used, and amniotic membranes can also be used. But again, these usage of barrier dressing is contraindicated in any presence of any kind of infection over the affected site. Now, this covers the topic for today, and I'll be talking about nutrition and other management of other supportive care in the next class. Over to Ms. Shomashree for the next discussion.
Thank you, sir, for acknowledging us such a nice presentation. Cancer Rehab Therapist today enhancing the outcomes of. So, why cancer rehabilitation we are discussing? Due to the advanced cancer treatments and early diagnosis, the survival rate has been increased drastically over the past decades. But the research says that despite of the longevity, the survivors are living their life with some kinds of physical and emotional impairments. So cancer rehabilitation aims to promote their life to promote the optimal health for a better quality of life, which is based on the patient-centered issues. Oncology rehabilitation. Onco-rehabilitation is a multidisciplinary approach guided by a team of healthcare professionals to obtain maximum physical, social, psychological, and vocational functioning within the limits created by the disease and its treatment. So, for the team members, headed by oncologists in the radiation, surgical, and medical oncologist, physician, onco-nurse, cancer rehab therapist, occupational therapist, speech and cellular therapist, psychologist, nutritionist, vocational counselor, and the primary center of the team is patient and the family members. The cancer disease and the treatments have different effects on the different body parts. The most common cancer we see in our hospital, that is head, neck, and breast cancer, where the rehabilitation is of paramount importance. So today I'll discuss the complication due to head and neck cancers and related treatments. So the disease related to the complications are pain, anxiety, trismus, dysphagia, change in voice, fatigue. Surgery related pain, adhesive scar, decrease in joint range of motion, cervical stiffness, shoulder impairment, lymphedema, trismus, dysphagia, speech impairment, and fatigue. Chemotherapy causes pain, geostomia, mucositis, chemo-induced peripheral neuropathy, dysphagia, fatigue. And the radiotherapy includes the initial these things, complications are pain, mucositis, lymphedema, geostomia, dysphagia, and the late one, trismus, radiation induced fibers, radiation induced dermatitis, speech impairment, and shoulder pain, which results decrease in the function, decrease in the participation in the self-care, work, and which leads to the quality of life. Where we work, the areas of onco-rehabilitation work are the preventive care to prevent the loss of function, restorative care to restore the function in residual impairment, supportive care to prevent the effect caused by the immobilization and to improve the self-care skills, palliative care was for the symptoms relief, improvement of the well-being, and provide partial self-sufficiency. So we will now discuss the preventive management. For example, this man underwent post-operative medical neck discectomy. Other than dealing with the vascular and pulmonary complication, rehab management aims on the area which is damaged by the surgery, that is the shoulder and neck. So proper positioning of the neck and shoulder in the early rehabilitation is very important to prevent the stretch fibrosis of the trapezius and contracture of the unopposed pectoralis muscle. Here you can see in the first picture, that is we have kept the neck in a neutral position in order to avoid any kind of the stretch fibrosis of the neck and the trapezius. That is the two rolls in both the sides of the neck, and the shoulder is elevated and retracted. The scapula is retracted. That is the post stages of the post surgeries. Early cervical joint range of motion always started with the active and then followed by the active assistive. Early scapula and shoulder rehabilitation, you can see the scapular elevation and retraction, and the early, that is we have started in the like around 7 to 8 days of the post operation, and it is continued and bilateral active assistive shoulder motion using the neurovascular 18 days and the percent of the oral intake, only the 20% of the importance of the early rehabilitation to prevent all sorts of the complications which arise due to the surgery. So how we follow it, patient and family members education when the patient is discharged from the hospital, and we follow on the outpatient basis which continues for the next 3 months. Now comes to the restoration management. This 46-years old man came to the rehabilitation department in our hospital with a complaint of the limited shoulder abduction and flexion, which the shoulder abduction is lesser than the 90 degrees, which is impacting his self-care and work. As he was driving, it was impacting his work a lot. So we have, as soon as he knocked the rehabilitation department, we have started the neuromuscular shoulder rehabilitation with some resistive exercise, active assistive exercise, and we have started regaining his shoulder abduction about more than 120 degrees. Now the temporomandibular joint dysfunction of trismus. Trismus, when the patient complains about the trismus, we first assess with the trismus scale to measure the distance between the two incisional discs, and we start with the temporomandibular joint mobilization, then followed by the jaw resistive exercise, oromotor strengthening exercise, and tongue muscle resistive exercise. And Oravite resistive exercise, this is one kind of orthosis which we use for the temporomandibular joint mobilization. It can be done actively and also, and it gives a very objective value for the Christmas improvement. Head and neck lymphedema management. Head and neck lymphedema has a devastating effect on the patient quality of life. It may happen in the external and also internal. Externally, it can affect your ear, eyes, neck, even also your cheek, forehead. And when internally it happens, your oral cavity or tongue, then what happens? It affects your salivary. So what we do in the rehabilitation process, we do the manual lymphatic drainage, which is a very specific, gentle and rhythmic passive movements to encourage interstitial fluid to be reabsorbed by the superficial lymphatics. Then fluoroscopy guided manual lymphatic drainage, lymphatic exercise, pressure garment and kinesiotherapy. Let's discuss it. Manual lymphatic drainage, these are the rhythmic different kinds of hand movements which drain the lymphatic fluids to the drain into the thoracic duct. So you can see the in the direction of we are using how the lymphatic fluids are going to the thoracic duct. In rehabilitation feeling, the man you doing the lymphatic drainage, and this direction are doing so that they can follow it at home, and the self drainage they can do. And the lymphedema drainage kit, the right side pictures, you can see there are two type of kit which is used if you are not using manually. Then kinesiotaping, it facilitates the lymphatic drainage by microscopically lifting the skin, forms the convolutions in the skin, which increase the interstitial space. Thus, the pressure and the irritation which is taken by the neural sensory receptors and the lymphatic system to elevate the pain and channels more freely. Different color has different resistance, which is custom molded for the patient. When it is for the eyes, when it is for the neck, or it is for the ear, the resistance works differently. The Lycomed Fest on the right side, the man is using the Lycomed Fest. It is continuously because MLD, the 24 hours, you cannot do the MLD, but the pressure garment which the man is wearing, they can use it for the 24 hours except their self-care time. Now comes to the photobiomodulation therapy in the management of the oral mucositis. As Dr. said, the oral mucositis has a very devastating and effect on the patient quality life, and the poor nutritional intake leads to the poor health system, and it can delay the total radiation therapy time also. So, the modern therapy, rehabilitation therapy for the mucositis is photobiomodulation therapy or low laser therapy. That is the application of a band of monochromatic light in different wavelengths. That is especially the infrared, which is there to 650 nanometer, to the stress tissues to reduce the inflammation and to improve the healing. How it works? The light absorbed by the cytokine oxidase, which displays the mitochondrial nitric oxide, which reduces the oxidative stress and increases the ATP production, which helps the for the triggering the wound healing. So how it works, you can see the machine in the right side, the left side, different probes for intraoral and extraoral treatments for the treatment of mucositis and other dermatitis also. You can see here the oral mucositis given in the intraorally for the mucositis. TMJ, temporomandibular joint pain, when we are doing the temporomandibular joint manipulation, the pain started after that, and for to elevate the pain, we have to give the temporomandibular joint low level laser. So this would be this has effect on both the prophylactic and also therapeutic value. Prophylactic, when the radiation has started, before that we can recommend it, and also for the therapeutic value, you can start with the radiation conjointly, and it can be done in the 5 days in a week with the radiation time, 2 joules in the preventive, 2 joules for centimeter square, and 4 joules for the therapeutic value. Next is the galvanic stimulation, which used for the facial nerve palsy in the post parodactomy, and any reason due to facial nerve palsy happens in due to the surgery or any radiation, then we can apply this galvanic stimulation. Dysphagia. Now comes to dysphagia. Dysphagia is a very broad term, and it is the most challenging area in the rehabilitation science, because in head and neck cancer patient, dysphagia is always predictable because the structure and the site involved and the modalities used for the dysphagia. So dysphagia is a very early stage of management concern, because it can lead to the pneumonia, aspiration pneumonia. It can lead for the poor wound healing. It can make the person to receive his treatments ineffectively. So we should start the dysphagia very early phase with proper assessment. So we should take it, dysphagia we understood as both nutritional and also in airway blocking moments. Any stays in difficulty in swallowing like oral phase, pharyngeal or esophageal, it should be properly assessed. You can see how it happens in before swallow, that is prepharyngeal, during swallow during laryngeal elevation, and after swallow during the laryngeal depression. So it depends on the how the surgery or what is the structure rejected in the surgery, how this radiation affected the structures, like early structures like early complications like mucositis, xerostomia, dyschezia. That also can lead to dysphagia. Also in the late stage states like trismus, your xerostomia and dyschezia can last for long time. They can also lead for the dysphagia. The chemo-induced dysphagia, which happens mostly due to it is patient-induced. Sometimes they feel like nausea, vomiting. They withdraw themselves from the food. So that is called the patient-induced dysphagia. So dysphagia is a very broad term to discuss. So maybe it will take another one webinar for the dysphagia discussion. So what is the goal of dysphagia therapy in rehab? To maintain a self-swallow to reduce the risk of aspiration, prevention of infection, maintain the adequate nutritional intake. So how we evaluate the instrumental which evaluated under the physician, that is APES. Modified barium solar therapy is the gold standard treatment, instrumental treatment, evaluation for the dysphagia. Pharyngeal manometry, and non-instrumental when in area training, what we do for the dry swallowing, repetitive saliva swallowing, water swallow test, swallowing provocation test, percutaneous arterial oxygen saturation. Dry swallowing saliva, repetitive saliva swallowing done in the it's a very ideal atmosphere where patient is asked to dispose the saliva within some 30 seconds. If he is not able to do it very effectively, or very effortfully has to do, or not completing the 3 to 4 swallowing in 30 seconds, then we can assume of dysphagia. Then water swallow test. Water swallow test is a 30 milliliter of water is given to the patient at room temperature. If he is able to gulp it in one stroke, there is no sign. There is the grade is 0. If is 1 when he is gulping it, but effortlessly, not effortlessly, it is 1 or 2, then if the grade will be 1. If he is taking it, but the gulp is after the gulping, he is starting the coughing, then so signs of aspiration started, then 3. Then if it started 2 or 3 try also, he is not able to gulp it and started the signs of aspiration and coughing, then it go for the 4th stage. And swallowing provocation test, it is mostly used when to check any silent aspiration is happening or not, because how we test, a very narrow tube is inserted inside the nose, and to provoke the oropharynx. So when the swallowing in normal person within 1.7 seconds we start the swallowing reflex, but when there is a problem, when there is a signs of aspiration, the patient is not able to do it in swallowing reflex, then and it takes more than 3 seconds, then we can assume for a silent respiration. Percutaneous arterial oxygen saturation is the risk management when the patient is taking the liquids and solid foods. We can just use a pulse oximetry to check whether the oxygen saturation is going down or not. So what management we do, our management is divided into indirect and direct. Indirect with the proper posture, that is the head erect posture, the back and the middle back and the lower back should be supported enough, and that the chin should be always tucked down. The oromotor training, that is the strengthening exercise of the oromotor muscles. Vocalization is the consonant production of the different consonants, level consonants like pa, ba, and the tongue consonants like ta and da. So eyes, as you know, this is a provocatory effect on the saline reflex. Positions and maneuvers I will show in the next slides. This is the indirect approach. This is different postures, chin to tail, head tilt towards the strong side and head rotation towards the weak side for the easy galloping of the foot. The following maneuvers we do, that is the supraglottic, super supraglottic, Mendelssohn maneuvers, Masapo, Equatocella, Bryson. Mendelssohn maneuvers, you can see the here. We have to the first is that we have to the aim is to elevate the larynx properly. So in the Mendelssohn maneuvers, the man, you can see the man is lifting the larynx in a erect posture and to hold it and the gulp your saliva, and after that you have to breathe out. In supraglottic, which is the more effective way of, first you breathe in, then take the sip of water, larynx with a laryngeal elevated position, and gulp it and give a coughing reflex, so that the whatever the residual it can take off. The Masaka maneuvers, where the tongue is inside the both the teeth and the forceful tongue to strengthen the tongue retraction. Direct approach, it is always with the collaboration approach with the dietitian, and starts with the initial diet when the conditions improve, then sphagic diet and transitional diet when the patient is able to take the both liquid and solids. Now, so we have finished the head neck cancer part. And what is the role of the rehabilitation in the head neck cancer part? So now we are going to discuss and what is the role of rehabilitation of breast cancer. So common side effects related surgery and chemotherapy and radiation. You can see it in the slide, because if I explain it will be very big. So what we do the post-operative in patient management, when the patient has underwent any kind of mastectomy or disease or reconstructive surgeries, the initial 1 day when the patient is inpatient, the aim is to correct the breathing pattern, effective airway clearance, symmetrical lung expansion, and early guided arm movements under the supervision of rehab therapists once the surgeon permits. Why I am telling about the guided arm movements? Because there is a myth that you have to move your hands fully once you have started your arm movements. So it should not be happen. It should be under the guidance of the rehab therapist. It should be initially, it should go to the 90 degrees on the first week, and then gradually it must be increased. These are some exercises which you do. Then sequencing of the rehab guidance in the 2 to 8 weeks, focus on the breathing techniques, pain control, lymphatic drainage, range of motion improvement, pelvic and core awareness when there is a reconstructive surgery with the tram flap or DIP flaps. Assist stability and strength of the affected limb. And the 8 to 15 weeks we go for the general stretches and general conditioning exercise. And 6 months onwards we go for the upper limb strengthening and lower limb strengthening, core strengthening, and increase complexity of exercise if the lady is on chemo or any other adjuvant therapies. And what the other complication we see in our clinic mostly, that is one of the very disabling condition is axillary wave syndrome. What is that? It is a very overlooked condition, mostly seen 86% of the patient following the breast cancer surgery with axillary lymph node dissection. It presents with a tight cord in the subcutaneous tissue and axilla, extend down the medial volar surface of the ipsilateral upper arm along with the ipsilateral chest wall. Commonly develops 2 to 8 weeks following the breast surgery. Assessment, how we do? Pain, there is pain, restricted shoulder abduction, and flexion, visible and palpable when the elbow is extended and shoulder abducted. Sometimes the ladies may not fully extend their elbows because of pain. And how we deal with the rehab, we do with fascial release, soft tissue mobilization, cord manipulation, stretching in adapted arm, and some self-care activities or adaptive activities to do Now comes to the lymphedema. Lymphedema is the most common complications which is seen in the breast cancer, post-breast cancer patients. It develops when the lymphatic drainage systems is unable to work effectively as it has been damaged, overloaded, or impaired due to the lymph node dissection. So how we assess the lymphedema? In early stage, which is always overlooked, which is always neglected by the patients themselves, that is feeling of fullness or heaviness. It might remitting or relapsing. Then when it progressing is goes on, and goes on, then what happens? That is swelling the whole or the part of the limb, mostly started in the forearm and the volar surface. Tightness, skin changes, hyperkeratosis, fibrosis, pain or discomfort, deepened skin for recurrent cellulitis. Pitting edema may be or may not be distortion of the state, and stemmer sign may be positive or negative. Stemmer sign is if we are if you want to pinch the metacarpal areas, we can pinch our skin, we can lift our skin, but in the lymphedema hands we cannot do that. So what is the objective assessment? Objective assessment we do at a clinic, that is the circumference tape measurement of the both the hands and the difference between the measurements. Volumetry, biometric spectroscopy, that is BIS, which is mostly used in the Western countries. And the gold standard technique to confirm the presence of lymphedema is lymphiscangiography and fluorescence imaging with manual lymphatic drainage. That is FGMLD, which is both used for the diagnostic and also for the treatment. What we do here, that an injection with a fluorescence dye is injected transdermally on the hand, and it is used for the lymphatic mapping, so that where the which lymphatic pathways are working and not working, to see that. So when it flows, then we can when it flows with the help of infrared and the camera, we can see the dye is moving within the lymphatic channels, and we can predict where the blockage is there, where is not there, where is there is the free flow of lymphatic. So this is both for the treatment and for the diagnosis. So you can see the circumference measurement. Volumeter, actually this is for the accessibility is not very convenient to every places. So most of the time in our country we use circumference measurement, and recently we have started the BIS, that is biometric spectroscopy. Management of lymphedema. The gold standard International Lymphology Society has made this treatment, that is a complete decongestive therapy. It includes skincare, guided digestive exercise, manual lymphatic drainage, multi-layer lymphedema bandaging, intermittent pneumatic compression therapy. How it works? It provides an external pressure of high working pressure gradient and low resting pressure gradient, increases interstitial pressure, capillary infiltration, lymphatic reabsorption, increased lymphatic flow, lymphovenous muscular pump function aggravates, protect the skin, breakdown of the fibers sclerotic happens. So what is the protocol? When in the early stage, where the circumference measure difference is less than 2 cm, we offer a pressure garment to wear it for the 24 hours, except the self-care time, and followed by the resisting exercise. But when the circumference measure difference is more than centimeter, we have to give an intensive lymphatic drainage, that is we use here border techniques and intermittent pneumatic compression machine. This machine gives a gradient pressure, that is we usually, this pressure depends on the patient's skin fibrosis or the grade of the lymphedema. Now comes to the multi-layer lymphedema bandaging. This is the most important part of the CDT. It includes finger bandage, a roll of foams, and the short stretched bandages. It may look like a crepe bandage, but this is the ideal lymphatic lymphedema bandage. This is the short stage, which gives them more working pressure than the resting pressure, which usually the your crepe bandage gives the more resting pressure than the working pressure, and this gives the more working pressure. So this is the complete multi-layer lymphedema bandaging. It takes more than 15 to 20 days of sessions of lymphedema gives a good result for the lymphedema management, and then the patient and patient family members, they are educated to use this bandage at home for the maintenance therapy in the rest of their life. So in the photobiomodulation therapy for the breast edema and fibrosis, this is a new topic for the research. Now the research is going on, and there is much positive and evidence-based papers are coming out for the favor of the photobiomodulation therapy in the breast edema and fibrosis. And kinesio taping, it also increases the lymphatic drainage. Now come to the chemo-induced peripheral neuropathy. Chemo-induced peripheral neuropathy is anticipated for the majority of the breast cancer patients who receive neurotoxic chemotherapy depending on the agent used, dose, and the setting. What are the symptoms? The symptoms may be sensory or motor. The sensory are the dysphagia, paresthesia, allodynia, impaired or loss of proprioception, and motor, the muscles weakness. Mostly the distal part is first affected than the proximal, gait and balance impairment. This 61 years lady with DCS, after 5 to 6 cycles of chemotherapy administration, she has developed a severe grade of neuropathy, which starts in her feet and hands. She was unable to twist her fingers. She was unable to even feed herself, write herself, because she was a retired teacher and she has a dream of writing the books, but she was unable to do it before after once this have started, and it was very devastating effect on the self-care and also in the work. She has started the foot drop, that is on the distal muscle weakness, muscle wasting. There is gait impairment, balance impairment. Mostly she was in the wheelchair bound after this chemo toxicities. How we evaluate the sensation? We divided into present, implied, or absent. The sensation we Weinstein monofilaments. Pain is the protective sensation. Thermal and temperature sensation. Perception for 12 and 13. Localization. You can see these are some objective tools which is used for the stereognosis and proprioception and the temperature. So what is the management of the chemo-induced peripheral neuropathy? So our strategy is divided into 3 stages. That is the stage 1, mild symptoms, when the patient just started with the paresthesias. So to prevent the further complications, we start the rehab in a preventive aim. When the stage 2, when it interferes with the instrumental idea, means it's cooking or marketing, that is called the instrumental ADL, or that is psychosocial life, you can say. That also it needs urgent rehab, and when it interferes with the basic ADL, then also we have to start with the urgent rehab. So the techniques which we use, that is the sensory re-education and the compensatory techniques. Treatments for the education and safety, fall prevention, balance training, gait training, functional retraining, muscle strengthening, aerobic exercise, neuromuscular stimulation, and it should be started during also or maybe before the chemotherapy insertion. Fatigue. 70 to 80% of the breast cancer patients, they report significant level of fatigue, which is distressing, persistent at all phases of diagnosis and treatment. The test we use, because it needs a fatigue assessment laboratory of which they use, and the fatigue experts are there in our clinic, which we use, that is the 6 minutes walk test, and we evaluate the maximum oxygen volume, that is VO2 max. The VO2 max should be objectively tested in the instrumental wise. In 6-minute walk test, we can assume for the maximum VO2 max of the respective patients. The scale is FSS. And management of fatigue is relaxation exercise, moderate to mild aerobic exercise, energy conservation, walk simplification, lifestyle modification, adequate sleep, cognitive behavior therapy with collaboration with the psychologist. So recommendation for onco rehabilitation. So in the whole process, we have seen how rehabilitation works efficiently in the all phases of the cancer treatments before, during, or after the surgery, radiation, or chemotherapy. So to get the enough efficacy of the cancer therapies, so rehabilitation should be started in every stage of the as a prophylactic and also either as a preventive or as a therapeutic basis of treatment. So we have done in our Apollo Gleneagles Hospital, these two survivors, they have finished their 5. They are the winners, in fact. They are the winners of the 5 kilometers marathon, and this is finishing a 5 kilometers marathon is not an easy task for the normal human being and even the cancer patient. But this man, head and neck cancer patient, after the completion of the 2 months of the radiation, he has finished this one after getting a proper rehab training during the radiation and the followed radiation therapy, rehabilitation therapies. So this is the final words I can say. When I replaced with we, when illness becomes a wellness, how the rehabilitation works and give a meaningful quality life to the cancer patients. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. So there is a question. Would you please?
Any?
Yeah. So there's a question. Would you please explain the supraglottic and
Any
the
questions or any?
Yeah, there's a question. Can you please repeat the supraglottic and Masako technique?
Yes,
Yeah. Yes, can you repeat your question? My voice is...
Okay.
Any issue?
Yes, sir. Can you please? There is the connection issue. Can you repeat the question, please? Supraglottic technique. Okay. Okay. There is a question. How to do the supraglottic? I'll show it. I have to show the video. I'll show it.
Your video is firing. Okay.
Yeah. Am I visible?
Yeah, we can see you.
There is a question how to do the supraglottic maneuvers. I saw it. The patient should be in the erect, the back and upper back, the lower back and the middle back should be supported enough. And first, the patient should take a deep breath, that is inhalation and through nose and exhalation through mouth. And you should take a deep breath. Lift your larynx, gulp it, and give a cough after finishing the salvage. Am I clear to Dr. Vidhi, sir?
Yeah. Can you speak up louder? Just show the whole procedure once again and just speak louder at each of the steps.
I have shown here now how to do the supraglottic maneuvers. First, the patient should be in relaxed position. The back should be supported enough, and the patient should take the deep breath, the inhalation, and nose and exhale to the mouth. And now hold the breath. Take your saliva. Uplift your larynx. Gulp it. And after that, you cough it. Am I clear to Dr. Reddy? Yeah.
Shomusri, can you hear me? Shomusri, can you hear me? This is Dr. Animesh Shah.
So once again.
Yes, sir. Ask a question. Hear you.
First of all, excellent presentation. So I've got a question for you. So if I refer a patient to you for swallowing assessment, what instrumental test you are capable of doing or you can do to assess swallowing function, whether the patient's swallowing is safe or not? Apart from the water swallow test and other non-instrumental test, what instrumental test you are capable of doing or you can do to assess swallowing function? Did you get my question?
Sure, I'll give you this answer. Actually, the instrumental method of your swallowing maneuver, your dysphagia, it should be done along with any ENT specialist, where the instrumental setup should be there. There should be the gold standard evaluation for the dysphagia is the modified barium cellular test. That is the world's international use for the test for use for the dysphagia.
Yeah, various center use various tests.
Here
Some
we in
many
clinic,
center use.
we only use for the non-instrumental. That is, you can say the water swallow test or repetitive the saliva test or provocation test and risk management dysphagia. If we are allowed to do that with the help of other physicians or under the guidance of ENT doctors, then we can take this dysphagia management to a higher level. We should have that kind of setups and kind of teamwork should be there for the dysphagia management.
So if you are not happy with non-instrumental test, would you suggest sending the patient for video fluoroscopy kind of assessment to ENT? Or
So would you please repeat your question?
My question is, when Samustri is not happy with the instrumental test, will she refer a patient to ENT specialist for video fluoroscopy, or I can ask the question to Riddhi also. So, do you refer patient to ENT consultant for video fluoroscopy when you're doubting swallowing safe swallow? This is my question to Riddhi. When you're doubting a patient about safe swallow, do you refer the patient for video fluoroscopy?
Yeah, Anish, can I take that question?
Yeah, sure, sir.
Yeah. Thing is that in OPD, first the subjective thing what we all are doing is that when the patient of larynx or oropharynx, hypopharynx comes, where we assess the swallowing function. First thing what we do is subjective assessment. What we do. So initially, what we do is a
water swallow test.
Water swallow test, and if we find that the patient is not able to swallow, if he starts coughing, so definitely in that case we refer the patient to the for the video fluoroscopy test. Now the issue is that now video fluoroscopy I forgot that doctor's name who was in Tata now is in Bombay. What was his name?
Oh, that's the South Indian doctor.
South Indian doctor. So, I have heard his presentation. Now the way he does it, it is something really amazing. Now here we had referred couple of patients, but that kind of a swallowing function it did not come, so that we can get a real idea. So anywhere where there is a doubt.
Yeah, Tata now has got a swallow therapist, dedicated swallow therapist, who does all this.
So they are now this the kind of an objective.
After that, South Indian guy left.
Yeah, so now he was doing an excellent work, and now with that kind of a legacy, of course, we don't have, but still, it's subjective. If you are not able to take the call, then definitely you have to refer the patient. But definitely that number is very less. I think 5 or 6 times I have referred the patient for video fluoroscopy, and in that also I was not very satisfactory. But wherever I have a doubt, the swallowing function is not good, I don't take up the patient for radiation unless and until there is a contraindication or the patient himself says he doesn't want surgery, then only we take for radiation. Otherwise not. Yeah, his name was Balaji. Now I remember Balaji. Right?
Yeah, Balaji. So among our ENT consultant, who does this video fluoroscopy, or all of them does?
No, not all. Basically we refer it to Sukrit or Shantanu Panja, and they refer it to somebody else. They are also not doing probably. Okay. Yeah, so they are also not doing it. Okay. Yes. So Samishi want to add something.
Sir, when the dysphagia actually is it's a very broad, as we all know, and depending on the structure involved, which dysphagia can be due to the oromotor control and also due to the pharyngeal and laryngeal structures and soft palate, hard palate structures. So when we assume for this thing is very low and low grade, then we can assume we cannot go for a direct butter swallow test or very subjective test. When the subjective test is done, we can lead a silent aspiration, which is a very hazardous effect on the patient's symptom. So we cannot go for the subjective assessment when we know the structure involved, or the structure is rejected, or a structure is exposed to the modalities, radiation modalities. We cannot go for the subjective assessment when we know the risk structures are involved, other than the oral cavity things or structures. We cannot go for the subjective.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We'll end this session then.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you so much. We're ending the session.